Good morning and welcome to the Museums and WorkSafe Tasmania COVID Safe Work Plan session. I hope you've all been keeping safe and well. I'd like to introduce myself before we begin. My name's Jackie Allen and I'm a Deputy Secretary with the Department of State Growth, and my area of responsibility is Cultural and Tourism Development, which includes Events Tasmania, Arts Tasmania, Screen Tasmania, support to the tourism and hospitality industries, and also the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying respect to the traditional and original owners of this land, and to pay respect to those who've passed before us, and to acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community who are custodians of this land. We're currently living through a pretty unique time in our history, impacts that we are yet to fully experience. We recognise this, an important role that all of our cultural organisations and facilities play in our lives. And the reason we put together these sessions is to hopefully provide you with some guidance around how to prepare your COVID-19 safe work plan and answer any specific questions that you might have that will help you get up and running as soon as you possibly can. So just to speak to how this session will work, the session is being broadcast live, so please be patient with us if there's a little bit of a lag or we have issues with the technology. But we're also recording this session and it will be made available on our website later this week. We'll send out an email to everyone who's registered so that you can access it as soon as it becomes available. We're going to start the session with a presentation from Brad Parker at WorkSafe Tasmania about how to complete your plan and any tips that we might have. And then we'll follow that with a question and answer session. So we've had a number of questions submitted before this session commenced, but we also have the opportunity to receive questions from you while the session's going using the chat function on Teams. If we can't answer all of your questions now, or we don't get to all the questions, we'll also be publishing a frequently asked questions document on our website along with the other support material. And just as a housekeeping item, can I encourage everyone to make sure they've muted their microphone? That will help us deal with any feedback issues that we might experience along the way. So before I hand over to Brad, it's probably important to acknowledge that each venue and organisation is unique, and you need to develop your own business plan based on the relevant information for you. There's a number of guidance documents and they're general in nature, and as a operator of an organisation or a venue, you need to develop the processes that are specific to your situation. Before I hand over to Brad for his presentation, I do want to start with a couple of pertinent questions though, Brad, that have come up from participants. We have been asked whether the COVID safe workplace plans apply to organisations that are run by volunteers or are not-for-profit organisations. Can you answer that for us?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, so the requirements around volunteers and not-for-profits are very much aligned with the Work Health and Safety Act, and whether you're a PCBU or person conducting a business or undertaking within that capacity. So if you're an undertaking or running a business or running an event or running an activity, and you're in control of that situation, then you have obligations in respect of making sure the safety of people who attend that event or that activity, or the people that work in that environment, are kept safe. The same applies to COVID. COVID is essentially just another hazard in a workplace, and as such, the obligation on those running the event are the same as for the Work Health and Safety Act, and therefore you are strongly encouraged to have a COVID safe plan for those events in order to ensure that those risks are mitigated and people are not exposed as part of attending that event.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brad. We might throw to your presentation now, if that's okay.
Yep. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. And the first place or point of call that I wish to go to is to and draw your attention to is the coronavirus.tas.gov.au website. This is a very good source of information in regards to getting information around what the current requirements are and a whole range of other issues in regards to helping you work through and manage your risks. I'm going to just zip down into the facts and to the resource area, and just to make you aware that there are a whole lot of fact sheets and information sheets in regards to specific areas, which I would encourage you to have a look at and work your way through, so that, you know, as a source of information when you're preparing your plan. Also, there's some posters available which you can print out and put within your workplace in regards to the washing hand procedures and those sorts of areas, to encourage people to do the right thing, and to remind people that they need to be working through and helping you to manage the risk of reducing the spread of COVID. I'm just going to dwell slightly in the orders and the notices area. So we are still under an emergency, a state of emergency under the Emergency Management Act, and we're also under a public health emergency under the Public Health Act. So what that means is that the Director of Health is able to issue directions in regards to specific topics that then allow, that set the rules that need to apply to manage the risk associated with the health emergency. So I'm going to take you to the Workplace COVID Plan number 1. And if you click on that, what that does is provides the actual direction or the legal requirements that exist with a PCBU or a business in regards to COVID-19 and working through the areas that need to be managed within the workplace. So I'm just going to briefly touch on this, and then that'll feed into the development of your COVID safe plan, and we'll also touch on some guidance available about some of the things you may consider in developing your plan. So the first requirement is, so where practical, each person at the workplace must ensure that there are no less than 1.5 metres between the person and any other person. So that's the social distancing rule. You'll note that it does talk about where practical. There are situations where it's not always practical, and we'll explore that a little bit more as we go through. We then go through, if it isn't practical, then there are what other procedures that you need to apply in regards to trying to reduce the risk, and that's about minimising the time where you may be at a reduced level of 1.5, and what other controls do you put in place in order to, again, reduce that risk. It talks about the total number of persons in a single undivided space. This order talks about the 1 person per 4 square metres. That's subsequently been reviewed, and it's now 1 person per every 2 square metres. So what that means is that you need to go through and work out the area of your building or your offices or your venues or your divided areas by measuring the length by the breadth, and then divide that by 2, and that'll tell you how many people you're allowed to have in that area. And you've also still got to maintain your 1.5 metres between individuals as part of that process. So there's certainly an important role there is to be able to put a sign on a door to say no more than 4, 6, 10, 12 people within this particular area, so people know that when they come into a room and there's lots of people in it, it may well be that they choose to go to a different area. That's particularly useful as you potentially may move around a museum or into different areas. Really quite important that you've clearly identified those areas where the density needs to be maintained and kept control of. There's a requirement around the information or around making sure that you're aware of the information that's out there, and that's the reason why I put why we went to the coronavirus.tas.gov.au website. You need to keep an eye on it, save it in your favourites as things change, and we all know that with this coronavirus things change quite rapidly. You are encouraged to keep an eye on that and get the most up-to-date information as part of that process, and that's actually a requirement under the order. Cleaning and disinfecting is important, so making sure that those areas where people make contact or come in contact with surfaces within the workplace are kept clean, and you're using appropriate disinfectants and to make sure that the virus or the risk of the spread of the virus is being maintained. With cleaning, it's a matter of identifying those areas which are high frequency touch points, and making sure that they are cleaned more frequently than probably the lower frequency touch points. So if you've got people using escalators or using lifts or using FPOS machines or those type of things where you've got lots of people using them, you should be seeking to clean them far more frequently than you would other areas that people may not touch as frequently as part of the process. It also goes through into encouraging people to practice good hygiene, which means washing your hands, using washing your hands appropriately with soap and water, encouraging people to wash their hands properly, so putting some pictures up around how to wash your hands. And you may recall that there were posters available on the coronavirus website there that allows you to send that message and make sure that people are doing it appropriately and correctly. We then move into supplies and making sure that people or the workplace has the appropriate supplies to keep the to make sure the cleaning is undertaken. Excuse me. Is that being undertaken appropriately and not using substandard products in order to undertake cleaning. You'll also the role of and I'll touch on, you'll see it go right through this document, the business or undertaking. So the person in control of the workplace, the business owner, needs to make sure that they provide appropriate instruction, training and supervision to their staff. It's one thing to come up with a set of rules and controls and have a COVID safe plan, but the key thing is the way you implement it. So you need to make sure that you've sat down with your staff, you've gone through the process and had their input in developing the plan, and also as part of that process you're also providing additional training in regards to the way some of these activities need to be undertaken. That then leads itself to providing adequate supervision and making sure that people are supervised in the workplace and working through the requirements around making sure that those controls are effectively applied within the workplace. The next set of requirements is that if people are unsick or people are unwell, I should say, and showing signs of COVID, then they should be discouraged from entering the workplace. And that if you've got workers or people who have been subject to an isolation direction, then you shouldn't be allowing them in the workplace whatsoever. And this provides you with the legal right, if you like, in regards to preventing people from going or introducing the disease into your workplace. And then the other final requirement in this space is around making sure that if you collect information around who comes into your workplace or who enters your workplace, that you're able to provide those records or retain those records for 21 days. So this includes your video camera or surveillance cameras and those sorts of areas. You need to hang on to those for 21 days. In the event of an outbreak, then you're in a situation where it will assist in tracking who people came in contact with whilst they were in the workplace and who else was in the workplace. So really quite important. And then the final thing is that when you implement all the necessary controls as outlined by the order, it's got to be documented, and the way we document that is in our COVID safe plan, which is where we will now head off to and start to work through how to complete one of those. So bear with me for a moment. So the next place or important sorry, a little bit of zipping here. The next important website to be aware of is the WorkSafe Tasmania website, as that provides information in regards to COVID, but it also talks about helping you working through your COVID safe plans. So we've got a number of different sources of information here, which we'll work our way through. The first one I want to talk about is the COVID safe plan. So we have some templates here which can be applied by businesses. We've got one for fewer than 20 and one for 20 plus organisations. The main difference between the two is one is about just listing down what you're going to do for the smaller business one. The medium one actually provides a little bit more of a useful tool in regards to working through the way you complete the document. And we'll just walk through this. The content's the same, it's just a different way of presenting it. So obviously, as part...
Yeah, sorry
Yep.
to interrupt. We might need you to share your screen again because your screen has dropped off our display. Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So this is the medium business template. Fill out the details of business name and the details of completing it, but what it goes through and then it says, righto, let's talk about the way we manage the risk. Now, COVID is a hazard that applies in the workplace. There are mandatory requirements around the way you manage it, and all this is doing is seeking to get you to document the way you intend to do that. If you have a risk management system in your workplace where you actively manage other hazards within the workplace, whether it's security, whether it's slips, trips and falls or other types of hazards within the workplace, the same methodology can apply in that as to managing COVID. But this one you can also apply, which basically says that you identify what the hazards are, what you need to do in order to fix it, how you're going to go about it, when you're going to do it, and what things you need to do in order to work your way through that process. So we'll just touch on cleaning and hygiene. So as we mentioned before, it talks about what's the frequency at which we're going to go through and clean those high touch points. So we need to have actually identified where those high touch points are and then be working our way through and saying, well, how frequently do we need to touch them, to clean them, who's going to do it, what cloths do they use. There's some really good systems in regards to some of the businesses have been really quite ingenious with regards to colour coding their cloths depending on the surfaces they need to use, and they've used dots to identify which types of cloth should be used in certain circumstances. We have schedules of cleaning and wipe down so you're able to record when things were done. All those sorts of innovative and practical solutions to allow you to build this into the way you do business is really quite important. And that's the reason why this template is actually quite good from the point of view that it clearly identifies what's going to be done, who will do it, when it's going to be done, and if there's anything that's required as part of that process. Restrictions on entry, as we mentioned before, we talk about restricting entry to the workplace, making sure that people are aware around what the conditions of entry are, not to enter if they're unwell, those type of areas, making sure you've got security and you're policing it from the point of view of making sure that as people come into the venue and you've got certain numbers of people allowed or density in a particular room, you've got people monitoring that, so you're not all of a sudden getting a whole lot of people moving into a room and your density you start to exceed the density provisions. You've got to keep people moving around, encouraging people to, if a particular area is full, to go somewhere else and come back a little bit later on. Those are the types of things that that you need to be working through with your plan in respect of making sure that you're able to control where people are going and not exposing people to risk by having too many people in the one area. Certainly the 1.5 metre distance rule is key, making sure that people are reminded that the rule applies and to aid them as part of that. So when they're lining up, making sure that there are dots on the floors or there's barriers between the people that they're dealing with in order to make sure that there's or limit the amount of close contact that occurs. There are some situations where people walk past each other and those sorts of areas. You try to minimise that the most you can. But again, we touched on it earlier that the actual duration of close contact is very minimal in those sort of situations, and as such, you need to try and minimise that where possible. But there are some times where that's not always achievable. Providing instruction, training and supervision is really quite important. So what information do we have? What do we need to, who's going to provide it? When is it going to be provided to staff? What training is needed? Working through that whole arrangement around clearly defining who needs what information in order to do their job properly, and then sitting over the top of it, how we're making sure that that's being applied. And I mentioned earlier about, a schedule on the back of a toilet door where someone's gone through and they've gone through and cleaned the toilets. They fill out the form and you can prove that they've done it every hour, and you can keep track of who's doing it and making sure that it's being done to the appropriate standard. The COVID Safe Plan also talks about having being able to respond to an incident in regards to should there be an outbreak. The key thing is that you notify public health if there is an incident, and they certainly take control in those sort of situations. And we encourage, that's the main source of information in the outbreak, because they take control of that process. As with any plan, you need to review it as information changes. So if as you start to implement these systems, some things will work, some things will not work particularly well. So you may need to seek to tweak them, to adjust them, to make them work a little bit better, and make sure that your controls that you're applying are the most efficient that they can be in regards to working through that process. So that's a pretty simple approach to managing or developing a COVID safe plan. The key thing here is in developing that plan is to be guided through things to consider to put in the plan, or what are those potential areas of risk within your workplace. If we go up to the COVID Safe Guidelines, at WorkSafe we have a range of different guidelines for a whole lot of industry sectors. And if we zip down to cultural and heritage and click on that one, you'll see that you've got a document specific to museum, galleries, etc. And as you scroll down, it talks about managing the risks. And down here are the first steps in undertaking that assessment is identify where the exposures are, looking at different types of hazards, and you thinking about, well, does this apply in my workplace? If I do, okay, I need to do something in respect of managing that as we move forward. And it provides the same for cleaning and hygiene. It just guides you through things you might want to consider, or you may not have considered as you were going initially developing your plan. For example, washing your hands. So when do you have to actually wash your hands? So defining when you want people to be washing their hands, just to maintain the hygiene thing. So it just gives you a bit of a prompt in regards to things that you need to consider when you go to that next step of developing and actually saying, well, what should we put in our plan? And this is all very much about working about what applies to your workplace, and making sure that you're able to, you're not forgetting something. So there's a two-stage process. It's one around looking at people as people move through your organisation or through your event or through your business or your workplace, and identifying those high-risk areas. But also, in addition to that, this is a particularly good way of just saying, oh, and did we consider this, or have we considered that? So I'd encourage you to download this document and have a look. Again, it talks about social distancing and provides you some guidance and some things to consider in regards to maybe reshaping the business you run and delaying time so you don't get crowds in at one particular point in time, staggering the way people enter and come into your organisation, dealing with queues. As people at the beginning of the day when everybody wants to get in, but maybe you can stagger that, separating or having multiple entrance points, and separating exit points from entry points. All those sorts of things they're pretty much identified throughout this document, and it provides you with the guidance you need to make sure that your plan is robust and sufficient to actually manage the risks that exist within your workplace. So that would be where I would be, the key documents or the key places that I would be encouraging you to visit as part of developing your COVID safe plan. You will see down there the whole range of various options in that space in other sources of information which you may choose to explore and have a look at. There's no shortage of information in regards to COVID, but I think the key thing from any business working through it, one, it needs to be tailored to your business, and two, you need to try and keep it as simple as possible. This shouldn't be overly complex. It's just that recognition that as people come in and out of your business, you just need to be able to make sure that they can come in with and you're able to minimise the risk should that COVID actually present in your workplace. So based on that, I might throw to some questions if that's convenient.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brad. In line with that sort of complexity issue, what would your advice be to museum operators about what are the most important things they can do to reduce the risk of coronavirus in their venue?
I think it's that logical process around looking at the point from when the patrons start to come to the workplace, and if there are ways that you're able to look at each step in the process as they progress through the venue and through the business, and try and identify ways at which you can actually maybe change, or if you can't change, then put in controls around the minimise the consequence. So as with managing any risk, it's about likelihood and consequence. So if you're able to focus on, well, if I can separate and keep distance between people, manage the way that they flow and move through the organisation, and we're able to put in processes to eliminate those higher risk exposure areas, it's nothing more complex than that. We don't need to see a complete redesign of businesses. I mentioned earlier about the need to, if you record people's details when they come into your business, that's if you record it. If you don't record it, you don't have to. So again, I've seen businesses that have been out building these complex systems to capture the name and the details of everyone coming into the organisation. At this particular point in time, that's not a requirement. It's just a matter of that if someone gives you credit card details, or you're able to have some CCTV, all stuff that you're doing as part of normal business, that just becomes, okay, I just need to make sure that I keep those records for 21 days and I've satisfied that requirement. So they're the sorts of things. Just keep it in a very pragmatic approach in regards to the way you want things to people to move within your business.
Fantastic. One of the big issues I think for museums is as people move through the gallery spaces, there are lots of surfaces that people can touch, maybe interactive displays or interpretation panels. How often should people be looking to clean surfaces?
Well, very, very much dependent upon how much interaction that there are, and I think there's a couple of things in that. One is if it's highly interactive and you determine the risk is high, then you might say, yeah, maybe we don't do that one anymore, because it potentially maybe, the risk is too great. But the other way is, well, maybe we just put a packet of cleaning or sanitizers next to the screen or whatever, and encourage people to give it a wipe down before they do it themselves. You still have your own people coming through on a regular basis, circulating, wiping surfaces down, but it may be that you just say, please wipe down before use, and you've got somewhere to pull out the wipes, give it a wipe down, and then dispose of them into a bin that, again, just reduces the risk in those high areas where you've got a lot of interaction happening.
Fantastic. And do you need any